I am Tessa, 34 years old, and today I was turned away from my own sister's wedding. I drove 9 hours straight from my military base to be there. But when I reached the grand doors of the venue, my parents blocked my path. Family members only, my mother told me coldly. You can watch it on the live stream from your car. Understood, I replied, and walked away. 2 days later, my mother called me, screaming, because the $35,000 catering bill bounced. I just smiled. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The drive from my base to Washington, D.C. had been brutal. I spent 9 hours gripping the steering wheel of my car, navigating through heavy traffic and pouring rain just to make it on time. My dress uniform was perfectly pressed and hanging in the back. I had changed in a gas station bathroom 20 miles outside the city, making sure every metal and pin sat exactly right. I was exhausted. My bones ached from a grueling deployment overseas, and jet lag was still pulling at my focus. But this was my sister Ashley getting married. You show up for family. That is what I had always been taught, even if that same family never seemed to show up for me. The venue was an exclusive country club in the heart of the city. It was the kind of place that screamed old money and closed doors. Massive white columns held up a pristine portico, and valet drivers in sharp vests were busy parking lines of luxury imported cars. I pulled my modest sedan into a spot far in the back of the parking lot, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. Growing up in a household managed by my mother Barbara and my father William meant living under a microscope. Everything was about appearances. Everything was about projecting the perfect image to their wealthy social circle. I had never fit that image. I was practical, straightforward, and I chose the military over the corporate ladder they had envisioned for me. Ashley, however, was their masterpiece. She was the golden child groomed for high society and perfectly molded to their expectations. I walked toward the grand oak doors of the country club. The evening air was humid, and the sounds of a string quartet drifted out from the main ballroom. I could see warm amber light spilling through the tall glass windows. Guests were mingling in the foyer, holding crystal glasses of champagne and wearing designer gowns that cost more than my monthly salary. I smoothed my jacket, feeling a brief flash of pride in my uniform. I had earned my place. I had built a successful defense logistics firm while serving in the reserves. I was a CEO, though my parents still dismissively referred to my company as a glorified warehouse job. They had no idea about the government contracts or the multi-million-dollar supply chain deals I managed. To them, I was just Tessa, the disappointment who wore combat boots instead of high heels. As I reached the top of the marble steps, the heavy oak doors swung open. But it was not a welcoming committee. It was my parents. Barbara stepped directly into the center of the doorway, her arms crossed tight against her chest. She wore a tailored silver dress that shimmered under the portico lights. William stood just behind her shoulder, his jaw set in a hard line. They looked like bouncers guarding a VIP lounge. "Hello, Mom," I said, forcing a polite smile. I know I am cutting it close, but the traffic on the interstate was terrible. My mother did not smile back. Her eyes swept over me, starting from my polished shoes and traveling slowly up to the medals on my chest. Her upper lip curled in disgust. "What are you wearing, Tessa?" "It is my dress uniform," I replied, confusion momentarily slowing my thoughts. "I just got off duty. I drove straight here." Barbara let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You cannot go inside looking like that. This is a black tie wedding. You look like a security guard." I stared at her, the exhaustion suddenly feeling much heavier. "Mom, I am an officer in the United States military. This is the highest formal attire I own. I am allowed to wear this to formal events." William stepped forward, pointing a finger at my chest. "We are not talking about military regulations. We are talking about social decency. Colin comes from a very prominent family. His parents are hosting governors and senators tonight. You showing up in that getup is an arrogant cry for attention. You are just trying to upstage your sister on her special day." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Upstage her, I drove 9 hours just to sit in the back row and cheer for her. I am not trying to upstage anyone, I just want to see my sister get married. You are socially unfit to be in that room, Barbara stated, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper so the valet drivers would not hear. You do not know how to mingle with these people. You will make us look ridiculous. We told Colin's family that you were working overseas and could not make it. Your presence here is a massive distraction. The words hung in the humid air. Socially unfit. A massive distraction. They had actively lied to the groom's family to hide my existence. I looked past my mother, catching a glimpse of Ashley laughing in the foyer. She looked beautiful in her custom white gown, surrounded by bridesmaids in matching blush silk. She glanced toward the doors, made direct eye contact with me, and then quickly turned her back, pretending she had not seen anything. Barbara reached out and tapped a small plastic placard sitting on a table near the coat check. It had a black and white square printed on it. Scan this, she commanded. It is a QR code for the wedding livestream. You can watch the ceremony from your car in the parking lot. Family members only inside. Family members only. The phrase echoed in my mind. I did not scream. I did not cry. Years of military discipline and a lifetime of emotional neglect had taught me how to lock down my reactions. I looked at the QR code, then back at my mother's perfectly powdered face. Instead of begging for entry, I let the history between us dictate my response. Family only? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Just like how you made me watch Ashley's college graduation from the parking lot because my car was not nice enough to be parked near the venue for the family photos. Barbara flinched slightly, but her face quickly hardened again. That was different. We had an image to maintain for the Alumni Association. And just like when you left me sitting alone at the enlistment center 5 years ago, because Ashley had a minor crisis over her cheerleading outfit, I continued, taking a step back from the door. Understood, William scoffed. Do not play the victim, Tessa. Just go to your car, watch the stream, and we will call you when they cut the cake. Maybe you can come to the back door and get a slice. I gave them a crisp, perfectly executed military nod. Message received, I said quietly. I turned on my heel and began walking down the marble steps. I did not look back. I did not wait to see if they felt any remorse. I already knew the answer. They were probably relieved. The walk back to my car felt entirely different from the walk to the venue. The heavy exhaustion in my bones was suddenly replaced by a sharp, crystal-clear focus. For years I had bent over backward to accommodate their demands. I had swallowed their insults, ignored their clear favoritism, and convinced myself that one day they would respect me. Walking across the dark asphalt of the parking lot, I finally accepted the truth. They would never see me as family. They only saw me as a resource. I unlocked my modest sedan and slid into the driver's seat. The quiet interior of the car felt like a sanctuary. I sat in the darkness for a moment, listening to the distant sound of the string quartet playing a joyful tune for the guests inside. I pictured the lavish floral arrangements, the imported champagne, the massive catering spread that awaited them. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened my secure corporate banking app. The screen glowed bright in the dark car. I navigated to the user management section. 3 years ago, right before a dangerous deployment to Kuwait, I had given my parents a high-limit corporate credit card tied to my logistics firm. I had explicitly told them it was the emergency family card, meant only to be used if someone ended up in the hospital and needed life-saving care while I was unreachable. Instead of medical emergencies, the recent transaction history on the screen told a very different story. There were massive pending charges for a luxury bridal boutique, thousands of dollars at a premium country club, and a massive authorization hold for a high-end catering company. They had been funding this entire extravagant wedding using my company's credit line, assuming I was too busy or too stupid to notice. I stared at the button on the screen. It was a simple red rectangle that read, "Freeze all authorized users." My thumb hovered over the glass. My mother had just stood in front of me, looked me in the eye, and explicitly stated I was not family. Company policy strictly prohibited non-family members from utilizing corporate assets. I was simply enforcing the rules. I pressed the red button. A confirmation message popped up. All associated cards are now frozen. Transactions will be declined. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the parking space. I glanced at the glowing windows of the country club one last time in the rearview mirror. "Enjoy the reception," I whispered into the empty car. I merged onto the highway and began the long drive back to my real life. The highway stretched out in front of me, an endless ribbon of wet asphalt cutting through the dark Virginia night. Rain pounded against the windshield of my modest sedan, but the rhythmic sweep of the wipers was the only sound I allowed myself to hear. I did not turn on the radio. I did not cry. Crying was a luxury you lost somewhere between basic training and your first overseas deployment. Instead, I let the heavy silence wash over me, carefully clearing away the toxic residue of my parents' country club dismissal. My phone sat in the passenger seat, its screen dark, holding the digital keys to my actual life, a life they knew absolutely nothing about. My mother Barbara and my father William had spent the last decade telling anyone who would listen that I worked a glorified warehouse job. They told their wealthy friends I moved boxes around for the government, a polite, condescending way of saying I was blue-collar labor. They never bothered to ask for the exact name of my company. They never cared to look past my combat boots. If they had, they might have recognized Vanguard Defense Logistics. They might have realized that I did not just move cardboard boxes. I managed complex international supply chains for elite military contractors. I owned the warehouses. I owned the transport fleets. I owned the entire firm. But they preferred their fabricated version of reality, a neat little story, where Ashley was the brilliant, beautiful success and I was the rugged, uncultured disappointment. I pulled over at a quiet, deserted rest stop, the neon lights reflecting off the wet pavement. I needed a moment to breathe, to fully process the absolute disrespect I had just endured. 3 years ago, right before I deployed to a highly volatile combat zone, I sat at my parents' pristine marble kitchen table and handed William a sleek metal corporate credit card. My logistics firm was just starting to scale massively, generating real revenue, but all I cared about was making sure my family was financially secure while I was stationed in a completely different hemisphere. I looked my father in the eye and gave him strict, simple instructions. "This is for medical emergencies only. If someone breaks a leg, if mom needs emergency surgery, if the roof collapses and you need a safe hotel, use this. Do not worry about the limit. Just keep yourselves safe until I get back." I trusted them. I wanted to believe that under all the superficial country club posturing, they were still my parents. I wanted to believe they would honor a promise made to a daughter heading into danger. I was incredibly naive. Sitting in my quiet car, I picked up my phone and unlocked it. I opened the Vanguard corporate banking application and navigated to the Authorized User tab. The alert notifications were a masterclass in blatant financial abuse. I slowly scrolled through the pending charges from the last week alone. They had not been buying medicine or fixing a broken roof. There was a $12,000 pending charge for imported white orchids from a luxury florist in downtown Washington. There was an $8,000 authorization for a custom champagne tower and premium vintage wine from a high-end distributor. There was a $15,000 deposit for elite white glove catering services. There were charges for designer shoes, expensive spa treatments, and luxury car rentals. They were using my emergency combat card to completely fund Ashley's dream wedding. They were spending the money I earned while sleeping in barracks and managing supply drops in desert heat. My heart beat with a slow, steady mechanical rhythm. They had turned me away at the door just hours ago. They had looked at my dress uniform, the very uniform I wore while earning the money they were currently spending, and told me I was not family. I stared at the bright red button on my screen. Freeze all authorized users. I did not hesitate. I pressed it. I watched the screen load, the small loading circle spinning for a fraction of a second. Then the pending status on the catering, the floral arrangements, and the champagne shifted. The text turned gray. Declined. Cancelled. Frozen. The digital trail of their extravagant theft vanished into the ether, leaving only denied authorization codes in its wake. I set the phone down, put the car back into drive, and pulled back onto the highway. The tight knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest for 34 years finally unspooled. I felt completely, utterly free. 48 hours passed in a blur of productive, highly profitable work. The wedding weekend melted away into a busy Monday morning at Vanguard headquarters. I sat at the head of my mahogany desk in my spacious corner office, sunlight streaming through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked our bustling shipping yard. I was wearing a sharp navy business suit, my hair pulled back into a sleek professional twist, a stark contrast to the uniform I had worn Saturday night. My desk was covered in complex schematics and secure digital tablets. I was in the middle of finalizing a $40 million supply chain contract for a new fleet of armored transport vehicles. The work required absolute precision, and my executive team had been operating at peak capacity all morning. My head of security, a former Marine named Jackson, briefly knocked on the glass door to drop off the final compliance reports. We exchanged a quick nod of mutual respect before he stepped out. I reviewed the final clauses, signed my name at the bottom of the digital document, and hit send. A profound sense of professional satisfaction settled over my shoulders. I had built this empire from the ground up, relying on pure grit, sharp intelligence, and the unwavering loyalty of my military colleagues. I did not need country club approval. I had real power. Just as I took a sip of my black coffee, my personal cell phone lit up on the edge of my desk. The screen flashed with my mother's name. I watched it vibrate, the sound buzzing aggressively against the wood. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. Barbara was calling back to back, a sign of absolute unfiltered desperation. She never called me during business hours unless she needed something to brag about, and she certainly never called me twice. The phone rang a third time, then a fourth. On the fifth consecutive ring, I calmly picked up the device and pressed accept. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair. I did not say hello, I just listened. Tessa. My mother screamed into the receiver. Her voice was shrill, completely devoid of her usual refined upper-class composure. She sounded like a cornered animal desperately clawing for an escape route. Tessa, you need to call your bank right now. I held the phone slightly away from my ear. The background noise on her end was pure, unadulterated chaos. I could hear people shouting angrily, the loud clatter of silverware being dropped on tile floors, and Ashley crying hysterically in the distance. It sounded like a full-scale riot was breaking out inside a five-star restaurant. I took another slow sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter dark roast. Why would I need to call my bank, Mom? Fix the glitch! Barbara shrieked, her breathing ragged and panicked. There is a glitch on the emergency card. You need to fix it right now before Colin's family finds out what is happening. The venue manager just locked the heavy brass doors to the private dining room. They are refusing to let the guests leave the farewell brunch. The caterers are threatening to call the police, Tessa. The final $35,000 charge bounced. Fix it immediately. I could hear a man in the background, likely the venue manager, demanding a valid form of payment. His voice was firm and unyielding, cutting through the murmurs of confused, wealthy guests. Ashley wailed louder, screaming that her perfect exit was ruined. The sheer panic in my mother's voice was a sharp contrast to the arrogant, cruel woman who had blocked my path 48 hours prior. She had built her entire social standing on the illusion of limitless wealth, and now that illusion was collapsing in front of the very people she was desperate to impress. I looked out the window at my shipping yard, watching a massive cargo truck roll through the secure gates of Vanguard Defense Logistics. I took one final deliberate breath, letting the reality of my power settle into my bones. There is no glitch, Mom, I said, my voice perfectly level and completely devoid of any sympathy. Corporate cards are strictly reserved for family emergencies. You told me to my face at the door that I was not family. Therefore, company policy strictly prohibits non-family members from utilizing corporate assets. The line went completely dead for a few seconds. I could hear the sharp intake of my mother's breath over the receiver. The chaotic background noise of the country club seemed to freeze as her brain tried to process my words. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped the hysterical pitch and morphed into a low, venomous hiss. "Are you out of your mind?" Barbara demanded. "You are holding your own sister hostage over a petty grudge. Colin's parents are sitting in the private dining room right now waiting for the farewell brunch to begin. The caterer is physically standing in front of the buffet doors. He is refusing to let the waitstaff serve a single plate of food until the final $35,000 payment clears. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for us?" I leaned forward and tapped my mouse, waking up my computer monitor. I opened the frozen account ledger and began scrolling through the denied charges. It is not a grudge, Mom. It is basic corporate compliance. You attempted to process a $35,000 charge on a business account that was explicitly designated for life or death medical emergencies. You are not bleeding out in an emergency room. You are trying to buy imported truffles and mimosa towers. I am simply preventing corporate fraud. Fraud. Barbara shrieked, the panic flooding right back into her voice. She abandoned any attempt at whispering. "We are your parents. We raised you. You gave us that card to take care of family matters. This wedding is a family matter. You are wealthy now, Tessa. We know you make good money at that logistics place. You can afford to fix this. Call the bank right now and authorize the transaction before Ashley finds out and has a complete breakdown on her first morning as a married woman." I did not touch my phone. I kept my voice perfectly flat, letting the cold reality of the situation settle over her. Ashley's emotional state is not my responsibility. And you are right about one thing. I can afford it. But I will not pay a single cent. 2 days ago, I drove 9 hours straight from a military base to celebrate my sister. I drove through torrential rain and heavy interstate traffic just to be there for her. I stood on the marble steps of that venue, completely exhausted, wearing the dress uniform I earned serving this country. And you looked me up and down like I was a piece of trash. Barbara scoffed loudly into the phone. "You are being completely unreasonable. We told you the dress code. You embarrassed us by showing up looking like you were ready to go to war instead of a high society wedding. You know how important appearances are to Colin's family. We had to protect Ashley's big day." "You did not protect anyone," I corrected her calmly. "You protected your own fragile ego. You stood in that doorway with Dad and explicitly told me I was socially unfit to be in the same room as your wealthy friends. You pointed to a plastic sign and told me to watch the ceremony from my car in the parking lot. You told me I was not family. You cannot disown me on Saturday night and then expect me to fund your luxury brunch on Monday morning." There was a scuffling sound on the other end of the line. I could hear Barbara frantically whispering to someone, likely my father. When she came back on the line, she completely shifted her tactics. The aggression vanished, replaced by a thick, manufactured sadness. She started crying, forcing dramatic sobs into the receiver. "Tessa, please," Barbara whimpered. "I am begging you. Do not do this to your sister. She is innocent in all of this. You owe her an apology for missing the wedding. You ruining her farewell brunch is unforgivable. You need to pay this bill as a way to make it right. You owe Ashley this money to apologize for abandoning her." I actually laughed out loud. The sound bounced off the glass walls of my office. The sheer audacity of her gaslighting was almost impressive. "I did not abandon Ashley. You locked me out. And let us talk about what I supposedly owe her. I am looking at the transaction history right now. The frozen catering charge is just the finale. Last week, you put $12,000 on this card for custom floral arrangements. You spent $8,000 on vintage wine. You used my emergency card to pay for her luxury bridal boutique fittings. I do not owe Ashley an apology. If anything, you owe my company a massive reimbursement." The fake crying stopped instantly. Barbara's tone snapped back to pure rage. "You ungrateful brat. We gave you everything. We put a roof over your head. We raised you. You owe us respect." "I gave you a card for medical emergencies," I replied coldly. "Not a blank check to buy your way into high society. The account is frozen permanently. You will have to find another way to pay the caterer. Maybe Colin's prominent family can foot the bill. Suddenly the phone was snatched away. The sound of fumbling plastic echoed in my ear before my father's voice boomed through the speaker. William was furious. His voice carried the heavy, intimidating authority he had used to control our household for decades. He thought he could bully me into submission just like he did when I was a teenager. "Listen to me very carefully," Tessa William growled. "You are going to call your bank and you are going to lift the freeze on that card this exact second. You are not going to disrespect your mother and you are not going to ruin your sister's wedding weekend over some pathetic temper tantrum." I took another sip of my coffee. "Hello to you too, Dad." The answer is still no. William lowered his voice to a menacing whisper. "You think you hold all the cards because you manage some warehouse over in Virginia. You think playing soldier makes you tough. If you do not authorize this $35,000 payment right now, I am going to make a phone call that will ruin your life." I leaned back in my leather chair, genuinely amused. "Is that right? And who exactly are you going to call?" "I am going to call your commanding officer," William threatened, his voice dripping with malice. "I know you are terrified of losing your military career. I will call your base commander, and I will report you for elder abuse. I will tell them you are financially neglecting your parents and committing fraud by revoking promised funds. I will tell them you are mentally unstable and unfit to serve. I will have you stripped of your rank and fired from your little warehouse job before the sun goes down." I sat in my spacious corner office looking at the $40 million government defense contract sitting on my desk. I thought about the hundreds of employees who worked for me. I thought about the massive supply chain network I controlled across 3 different continents. My father truly believed I was just a low-level employee scraping by in a dusty warehouse. He believed his country club connections gave him the power to crush me. He had absolutely no idea who he was talking to. A slow, sharp smile spread across my face. "Go ahead, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, terrifying whisper. "Call them. But you should probably know how corporate credit cards actually work before you make that threat. You see, an employee cannot freeze a corporate account. Only the account owner can do that. I did not report the card stolen to some random bank teller. I shut it down through the executive portal." "What are you talking about?" William demanded, his confidence faltering for the first time. "Just unfreeze the card before I make the call. I am talking about reality, Dad. You think I work in a warehouse? I own the warehouse. I own the transport trucks. I own the entire firm. You are standing in a country club trying to pay a caterer with stolen funds, and you are threatening to get me fired from my own company." The line was dead silent. I could hear the faint sound of his uneven breathing. "Go ahead and call the police, Dad. Call the military. Call whoever you want. Tell them you committed credit card fraud using an account that belongs to the CEO of Vanguard Defense Logistics. Because I am the CEO. I own the company. I authorize the charges. And I am telling you right now, you are cut off." I did not wait for his response. I pressed the end call button and set the phone face down on my desk. I kept my phone face down on the polished mahogany wood of my desk. For exactly 60 seconds, the device remained perfectly still in the center of my blotter. The Vanguard headquarters around me hummed with quiet, efficient energy, completely detached from the absolute meltdown happening on my personal device. Then the vibration started again. It was not a phone call this time. It was a relentless, aggressive barrage of notifications. I picked up the phone and tapped the glowing screen. A new voicemail from Ashley had just landed, marked urgent. I pressed play and put the audio on speaker, letting my sister's shrill, frantic voice fill my corner office. She was not just crying, she was hyperventilating with pure rage. "You ruined my life, Tessa!" Ashley screamed, her voice cracking under the heavy weight of her own entitlement. "You completely ruined my perfect day." Colin's parents had to pay the caterer with their personal check while the staff held our luggage hostage. Do you know how humiliating that is for me? You are just a jealous, bitter spinster. You could not stand to see me happy and glowing because no one will ever love you. You did this out of pure spite because you have absolutely nothing else in your pathetic life. Unfreeze the card right now and wire the money to Colin's father, or I swear to God, I will never speak to you again." The recording ended with a sharp, echoing click. I did not feel a single shred of guilt. If anything, the voicemail completely solidified my resolve. I swiped out of the voicemail application and opened my text messages. The family had officially gone nuclear. Within the hour, my mother had clearly mobilized our entire extended family to launch a massive social media smear campaign and a direct digital assault on my phone. The text messages were relentless, popping up one after another in a continuous stream of venom. Aunt Patricia texted to tell me I was a deadbeat sister and a total disgrace to the family name. Cousin Greg sent a massive block of text accusing me of trying to sabotage a beautiful sacred wedding out of pure, unadulterated jealousy. Uncle Richard left a voice note calling me a heartless monster for causing my mother to experience severe heart palpitations in the middle of a crowded country club foyer. They called me spiteful. They called me selfish. They bought into Barbara and Ashley's fabricated narrative, completely believing without question that I had intentionally waited until the post-wedding farewell brunch to pull the financial rug out from under them, simply to cause the maximum amount of public damage. My phone buzzed again with a notification from a social media platform. Ashley had just posted a long, tearful status update to her thousands of followers, vaguely referencing a toxic, jealous family member who tried to destroy her new marriage out of spite. I did not reply to a single message. I did not try to defend my character. Years of military leadership had taught me that arguing with people who are entirely committed to misunderstanding you is a massive waste of tactical resources. I simply switched my phone to silent, disabled all push notifications, and tossed the device into my bottom desk drawer. I let them scream into the void. I had actual work to do. I turned my attention back to my dual monitors. I logged into the Vanguard Defense Logistics Central Financial Portal. I bypassed the standard employee expense accounts, utilizing my CEO credentials to access the highest level of executive financial records. I typed the specific routing number for the emergency family card into the global search bar. The secure system pulled up the raw data instantly. For the past 3 years, while I was navigating blinding sandstorms, securing dangerous military supply routes, and dodging hostile fire overseas, I had completely ignored this specific account. I had trusted my parents. I had assumed the few mobile alerts I saw in passing were for legitimate health concerns, routine co-pays, or urgent household emergencies. Now, sitting in the safety of my office, I was looking at the raw, unfiltered truth of their betrayal. I shifted from a passive observer to an active investigator. I started systematically pulling the data from the cloud servers. I downloaded every single receipt, every vendor invoice, and every detailed bank statement tied to that specific corporate card for the last 5 years. The deeper I dug into the transaction history, the more disgusted I became. The unauthorized spending had started small, just a few $100s here and there, at high-end organic grocery stores and local spas. They were likely testing the waters to see if I would notice the discrepancies. When I remained silent, assuming they just needed a little help with daily expenses, the floodgates completely opened. I found a massive charge for $8,000 at a luxury country club. That was their initial membership initiation fee. I found tens of thousands of dollars in charges at elite designer boutiques in downtown Washington. I opened a separate browser window and matched the transaction dates from the expense report to photos Ashley had posted on her public social media profiles. The designer leather bag she flaunted last Christmas was paid for by my company. The imported caviar and premium champagne they served at their lavish summer garden parties were funded entirely by my combat pay. I kept scrolling, my eyes scanning the endless lines of luxury theft. I pulled up a staggering $12,000 charge from a boutique European travel agency. I cross-referenced the booking dates. It was authorized right around the exact time Ashley claimed she was going on a soul-searching trip to Italy and France, after dropping out of her master's program. She had not funded that trip with her own savings. She had found my corporate credit line. I watched the numbers tally up on my screen, realizing my parents had used a soldier's hard-earned money to fund a parasite. They had treated my defense logistics firm like their own personal bottomless slush fund. I did not just look at the numbers, I documented them with absolute precision. I created a secure encrypted file on my desktop. I dragged every fraudulent receipt and every unauthorized invoice into the master folder. I used my logistics tracking software to organize the financial data chronologically, highlighting the most egregious and expensive unauthorized purchases in bright yellow. I compiled a bulletproof 50-page forensic audit of the so-called family card. Every single unauthorized charge was categorized, totaled, and paired with the exact Vanguard corporate financial policy it blatantly violated. It was a masterpiece of financial accountability. It proved without a shadow of a doubt that my parents and my sister had been committing systemic corporate fraud for years under the guise of family emergencies. I saved the final document, locked it with a passcode, and exported it as a pristine, undeniable PDF file. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my tired eyes. The sheer volume of money they had stolen from my firm was staggering, but having the physical proof neatly compiled on my hard drive gave me a profound sense of control. The narrative was no longer in their hands. I owned the facts. Just as I finished encrypting the master audit file, a new notification pinged loudly in the upper right corner of my primary monitor. It was an email marked with high importance and an urgent read receipt request. The sender address belonged to a highly prestigious, exceptionally expensive civil litigation law firm based in downtown Washington, D.C. I opened my secure inbox. The subject line was written in bold, aggressive, capitalized lettering. Notice of intent to sue, breach of verbal contract. I clicked on the email, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. The message was drafted by a senior managing partner at the firm, clearly retained on an emergency basis by William. The language was arrogant, condescending, and heavily threatening, perfectly mirroring my father's blustering, authoritative tone. The high-priced lawyer stated that by issuing the emergency card to my parents, I had willingly entered into a binding verbal contract to provide ongoing financial support to my family. He audaciously claimed that my sudden, unannounced freezing of the corporate assets constituted a malicious and intentional breach of that verbal contract. The lawyer insisted my actions had caused severe emotional distress, extreme public humiliation, and irreparable reputational damage to his clients during a highly publicized social event. The final paragraph of the email was a direct, uncompromising ultimatum. The lawyer demanded that I immediately unfreeze the corporate credit card and wire the exact sum of $35,000 directly to the country club venue within 24 hours to settle the outstanding debt. If I failed to comply with these demands, by the specified deadline, the law firm would officially file a devastating civil lawsuit against me and my logistics company. They threatened to drag my name through the public courts, alert my government contractors to my supposedly unstable financial practices, and completely ruin my professional reputation forever. I stared at the blinking cursor at the bottom of the screen, a quiet laugh escaping my lips. I did not draft a frantic reply defending myself. I did not forward the email to my own legal team. I simply opened my calendar application and created a new event. I titled it Vanguard Corporate Asset Audit and Compliance Review. I set the time for exactly 1 hour from the current moment. I added William Barbara Ashley and the senior managing partner who had just threatened me to the mandatory attendee list. I attached the secure 50-page PDF file to the invite, locked with a randomly generated passcode that I would only provide during the meeting. I hit send and watched the delivery confirmations roll in. They all accepted within 5 minutes. They thought they had won. They thought they had backed me into a corner and that this video conference was my formal surrender. Exactly 1 hour later, I clicked the link to open the video room. The screen populated with a grid of 4 squares. I sat in my quiet, well-lit office wearing my tailored navy suit, my expression completely neutral. In the next square, my parents sat together on the expensive cream-colored sofa in their sprawling living room. William wore a smug, victorious smile, leaning back with his arms crossed. Barbara sat stiffly beside him, her chin tilted up in a posture of absolute superiority. In the third square, Ashley glared into her camera. She was sitting in what looked like a luxury hotel suite, clearly her honeymoon destination, though the romantic atmosphere was entirely ruined by the furious scowl on her face. In the final square sat their high-priced lawyer adjusting his silk tie in a mahogany-paneled office that reeked of billable hours. The lawyer cleared his throat, taking the floor immediately. "Miss Wilson?" he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "I am glad you have decided to handle this like an adult. If you are prepared to wire the funds to the venue and reinstate your family's access to the shared accounts, we can tear up the intent to sue and put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind us. Your father has graciously agreed not to press charges for financial neglect if you comply right now." I did not respond to his threat. I did not even look at his video square. I clicked the button to share my main monitor with the group. A massive, heavily redacted spreadsheet filled their screens. "I am unmuting everyone's microphone," I said, my voice slicing through the digital static with absolute precision. "But you are going to listen. The document you are looking at is a forensic financial audit of a Vanguard Defense Logistics corporate account. This is not a personal joint bank account. This is a highly restricted commercial credit line issued to me in my capacity as Chief Executive Officer." William scoffed loudly, leaning forward toward his camera. "Cut the corporate nonsense, Tessa. You gave us that card. We had an agreement. You are legally obligated to honor it." I provided a passcode in the chat window, unlocking the PDF I had attached to the meeting invite. "Open the file," I instructed. I watched the lawyer's eyes dart to his second monitor as he opened the document. I scrolled down my shared screen, highlighting a block of transactions from 3 years ago. "Let us review the verbal agreement my father is referring to." I continued, my tone entirely clinical. 3 years ago, I deployed to a forward operating base. Before I left, I issued a corporate emergency card to William and Barbara strictly for life-or-death medical situations. Instead, I returned to find this. I highlighted a specific glaring line item. "Here's a $12,000 charge processed by a luxury travel agency in Paris." This transaction was authorized the exact same week my logistics unit was taking indirect fire in a combat zone. "You used my hazard pay, the money I earned while wearing body armor and sleeping on a cot, to fund Ashley's 6-week trip to Europe because she needed to find herself after dropping out of her master's program." Ashley's face turned a violent shade of red. "That was a family expense," she yelled into her microphone. "I was going through a severe mental health crisis. You have plenty of money. You are just being incredibly greedy and trying to humiliate me on my honeymoon." I ignored her outburst entirely and scrolled down to the next highlighted section. "Here is an $8,000 charge processed 14 months ago for a platinum tier country club membership. Here are the subsequent monthly charges for imported Orchids cases of vintage champagne and private tennis lessons." I looked directly into my camera, locking eyes with my parents. "You haven't been raising a golden child. You've been funding a parasite using a soldier's blood money." "How dare you speak to your sister that way?" Barbara shrieked, her hands flying to her face in mock horror. "We are a family. Families support each other. You gave us access to that money, and we utilized it to maintain our standard of living." I finally shifted my attention to the fourth square on the grid. The lawyer was no longer looking at the camera. He was staring intently at the 50-page audit on his second monitor. The arrogant, condescending smirk had completely vanished from his face, replaced by a rigid, wide-eyed expression of sheer panic. "Mr. Sterling," I said, addressing the lawyer directly, "I am sure a man with your extensive legal background understands the strict federal regulations surrounding corporate assets. My parents retained your services under the false pretense that this was a domestic dispute over a shared personal bank account. They lied to you. They failed to mention that the card is the property of a government-contracted defense firm." The lawyer swallowed hard, his skin turning a sickly shade of gray. He was putting the pieces together in real time. He realized that by sending me a written demand to release funds from a frozen corporate account to pay for a personal wedding, he had inadvertently documented an attempt to extort a federal contractor. If you pursue this lawsuit, I continued calmly, I will not simply defend myself in civil court. I will hand this 50-page forensic audit over to the federal authorities. I will report William, Barbara, and Ashley for systemic corporate fraud, wire fraud, and the unauthorized distribution of commercial assets. And since you just sent an email demanding I unfreeze those stolen funds to pay a private caterer, I will gladly hand over your written correspondence as evidence of your active participation in an extortion attempt. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the faint hum of my computer tower. The lawyer abruptly leaned toward his microphone. His voice was completely stripped of its former bravado. It was shaking. Miss Wilson, he stammered, raising his hands in a defensive gesture. I was not informed of the corporate nature of this account. My clients explicitly stated this was a personal family trust. I had absolutely no knowledge that these funds were tied to a defense logistics firm. William's face twisted into an ugly sneer. What are you talking about, Sterling? Do not let her intimidate you. She is bluffing. Sue her for every penny she has. The lawyer did not even look at my father. He kept his eyes glued to my video feed. Please be advised that as of this exact moment, I am formally withdrawing my representation of William, Barbara, and Ashley Wilson. I am officially advising my former clients that pursuing any legal action regarding this corporate account would result in catastrophic criminal liability. I will be sending an official termination of counsel notice immediately. Before William could utter another word, the lawyer's square went black. He had disconnected from the call, running as fast as he legally could from the radioactive disaster my parents had created. Ashley let out a piercing, hysterical scream. You ruined my life. You drove away our lawyer. Colin's family is going to find out about this. They are going to know we have no money. You are a monster, Tessa. Her square went black next. She slammed her laptop shut, severing the connection in a blind rage. That left only my parents. The smug, victorious aura that had surrounded them at the beginning of the call was completely gone. Barbara looked absolutely terrified, her hands trembling in her lap. But William was not capable of backing down. His entire identity was built on absolute control, and watching his high-priced lawyer flee the battlefield shattered his fragile ego. He erupted into a violent, red-faced rage. You ungrateful brat, William roared, leaning so close to the camera that his features distorted. You think you are so smart with your little spreadsheets and your corporate threats. You think you can treat your own flesh and blood like criminals. I am your father. I built this family. If you do not wire that $35,000 to the venue right this second, you are dead to me. I sat perfectly still, letting his fury wash over me without leaving a single mark. I am officially cutting you out of the inheritance, William screamed, a thick vein pulsing in his forehead. You will not see a single dime of the family money, and you can forget about the lake house. I am evicting you. You are permanently banned from stepping foot on that property. You will never spend another weekend at the lake house again. Consider yourself officially evicted. He sat back, breathing heavily, clearly believing he had just played an unbeatable trump card. He thought the threat of losing access to the sacred family property would force me to beg for forgiveness. I looked at the man who had blocked me from my sister's wedding because my military uniform was not good enough for his wealthy friends. I looked at the man who had stolen my combat pay to fund his country club lifestyle. A cold, sharp smile formed on my lips. Oh, Dad, I said, my voice soft but entirely lethal. We really need to talk about the house. William scoffed, the harsh metallic sound vibrating through the computer speakers. He leaned back aggressively against the expensive cream-colored sofa in their sprawling living room. His face was flushed, burning with a toxic mixture of high blood pressure and unchecked generational arrogance. He crossed his arms over his chest, projecting the absolute certainty of a man who firmly believed he still controlled the universe. There is nothing to talk about. William spat, his voice booming with unearned authority. The lake house has been the absolute crown jewel of the Wilson family trust since before you were even born. It is a place of refinement. It is an estate designed for the family to gather, to host galas, to entertain the board of directors, and to properly maintain our standing in the community. You have always treated that sacred property like a glorified military barracks. Barbara nodded vigorously beside him. Her tear-stained face tightened into a mask of vindictive agreement, eager to pile on the insults now that their lawyer had fled the scene. Your father is exactly right, Tessa. You treat that beautiful historic estate like a cheap campsite. You track mud onto the imported hardwood floors with your heavy combat boots. You completely isolate yourself in the master suite. We desperately needed that house for Ashley. We needed the grounds for her bridal showers and her elite engagement parties. But you refuse to participate in polite society. You lack the basic social grace required to cross that threshold. You are an absolute embarrassment to the family legacy. William pointed a thick, accusatory finger directly at his webcam lens. I am the sole executor of the Wilson Family Trust, he declared. I control the assets. I dictate exactly who benefits from our wealth and who gets cast out into the cold. And as of right this exact second, your name is completely and permanently struck from the ledger. I am making a phone call to a private security firm tomorrow morning. I am having them send a locksmith up to the lake house to change every single deadbolt on the property. They are going to pack your cheap army gear into black garbage bags and leave it on the curb. He leaned closer to the camera, a cruel, triumphant smile stretching across his face. I am taking the deed, and I am giving the keys to Ashley and Colin as a wedding present. It is the absolute least we can do to compensate for the horrific, unforgivable trauma you deliberately caused them this morning. You are entirely cut off from the family fortune. If you do not wire that $35,000 to the country club venue right now, you will never see the inside of that estate again. Consider yourself officially evicted. I did not interrupt his hostile diatribe. I did not raise my voice. I certainly did not panic. I simply sat back in my ergonomic leather chair, steepling my fingers together, and let him completely exhaust his aggressive tirade. I watched the way his chest heaved with the effort of yelling. I watched the way Barbara clung to his arm, entirely reliant on his illusions of grandeur. They were desperately clinging to a version of reality that had expired long ago. They had built their entire identities on the illusion of limitless, untouchable wealth, completely ignoring the mechanical, mathematical realities of how that wealth actually functioned. When William finally ran out of breath, panting heavily into the microphone, a thick, heavy silence fell over the video conference. I did not break eye contact with the camera. I slowly reached out and rested my hand on my computer mouse. Are you quite finished? I asked. My voice was dangerously even, completely devoid of any emotional reaction. I am finished when I say I am finished, William snapped, though his voice lacked its previous volume. You have an ultimatum, Tessa. Pay the caterer or lose the lake house. I moved my mouse and clicked a small icon at the top of my screen share. I closed the 50-page forensic audit detailing their rampant corporate credit card fraud. I opened a brand new tab in my secure web browser. The screen on their end immediately shifted from the damning financial spreadsheet to a stark, brightly lit government portal. Let us examine the actual leverage you hold, Dad, I said. I typed a specific web address into the search bar with deliberate, rhythmic keystrokes. You seem to firmly believe that you hold the ultimate trump card in this negotiation. You believe that because you were born into money, because you inherited a fancy title as the executor of a family trust, you possess absolute unquestionable authority over my life, my career, and my housing. The government website loaded instantly. It was the official public-facing digital archive for the county real estate records where the lake house was located. The official county seal was proudly displayed in the top left corner of the screen. What is this? Barbara asked, squinting tightly at her monitor. What are you showing us on the screen, Tessa? This is public record, Mom. I explained, my tone resembling a professor lecturing a particularly slow class. This is the unchangeable, legally binding digital ledger of property ownership for the entire county. Anyone with an internet connection can access it. I am accessing it right now to show you exactly how misplaced your arrogance truly is. I navigated directly to the property search database. I typed in the exact address of the sprawling multi-million-dollar lake house. The estate with the private boat dock, the wraparound cedar porches, the custom stone fireplaces, and the panoramic views of the water. The sacred family property that William claimed he controlled with an iron fist. I hit the enter key. The database spun for a fraction of a second before displaying a comprehensive list of legal documents tied to that specific address. I scrolled past the historical deeds and the original building permits, moving directly to the most recent transaction filings. William leaned forward, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "I do not care about your little computer tricks," he growled, attempting to maintain his aggressive posture. "The house belongs to the Wilson Family Trust. It has been secured in the trust since 1985. I hold the original paperwork in my physical safe downstairs." "You hold outdated, worthless paperwork," I corrected him sharply. I clicked on a PDF link titled Transfer of Deed and Ownership. The official government-stamped document filled the shared screen. "You see, Dad, while you were busy playing golf, buying imported champagne, and bragging to your high society friends about your massive real estate portfolio, you completely neglected the actual management of your finances. A family trust requires capital to function. It requires responsible administration. But you treated it like a casino. You leveraged the lake house to secure a massive commercial loan 5 years ago. You desperately needed the liquid cash to cover your failing, poorly researched stock investments, but you never bothered to actually pay the commercial loan back." I highlighted the top section of the public document. It detailed a massive, uncompromising bank foreclosure. "You ignored the warnings," I continued, my voice steady and unrelenting. "You threw the certified letters in the trash because you honestly thought you were untouchable. You thought a bank would never actually repossess a historic property from someone with your social standing. 2 years ago, while I was stationed overseas, managing billions of dollars in military logistics and coordinating supply drops in hostile territory, the bank initiated a full, quiet foreclosure on your sacred family property. They seized the estate to cover your massive defaulted debts. They legally stripped the trust of its assets." William's face was completely drained of color. The arrogant flush vanished, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. His jaw worked silently, trying to form words that simply would not materialize. Barbara covered her mouth with both trembling hands, a look of absolute, unadulterated horror washing over her meticulously made-up face. "The bank put the lake house up for private auction," I explained, highlighting the next section of the deed transfer. "It was going to be sold off to a ruthless commercial developer. Their filed blueprints showed they planned to bulldoze the entire historic property, tear down the cedar porches, and build a massive complex of luxury condominiums. You were about to completely lose the crown jewel of the Wilson family, and you did not even know it was happening because you were too busy planning Ashley's absurdly expensive engagement party." I scrolled down to the absolute bottom of the legal document, bringing the final signature block and the transfer of ownership into full view on the screen. The buyer's name was printed in stark, bold, undeniable lettering. I received an automated alert from a colleague in the commercial real estate sector. I said, letting the heavy reality of the document sink into their minds. I saw that the house was going to auction, so I stepped in. I did not use the family money because the family money was completely gone. I used my own personal capital. I used the massive profits generated from my supposedly pathetic warehouse job. I established a blind LLC to shield the transaction from the press. I wired the funds directly to the bank's liquidation department. I paid the back taxes you ignored for 5 consecutive years. I paid the contractor liens you refused to settle because you thought manual laborers were beneath your attention. I purchased the property from the bank in cash, completely clearing the outstanding debt and stopping the demolition tractors from rolling onto the lawn. I pointed my digital cursor directly at the bold text on the screen. The registered owner of the property was not the Wilson Family Trust. It was Vanguard Defense Holdings, LLC, a direct, wholly owned subsidiary of my logistics firm. I bought the house, Dad. I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the quiet office. I own the estate. I own the land. I own the private boat dock. I own the cedar porches. I own every single blade of grass on that property. William stared at the screen, his eyes wide, unblinking, and terrified. The absolute reality of his financial ruin was staring him right in the face. He could not bully his way out of a legally binding county deed. He could not threaten a government database. He could not yell at a bank transfer. The entire illusion of his power was completely irreparably shattered. I leaned forward, looking directly into the camera lens, ensuring he could see the absolute lack of mercy in my eyes. "Dad," I said softly, delivering the final devastating blow. "The family trust went bankrupt 2 years ago. You don't own anything." William stared at this camera, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He let out a harsh, barking laugh that held absolutely no humor, leaning forward until his face filled his video square. "You are completely delusional," he sputtered, though his voice lacked the booming authority it carried just moments ago. "The family trust is an ironclad institution. I have a team of wealth managers. I have an accountant I play golf with every single weekend. They would have notified me if there was a problem with the liquidity. You are sitting in your office fabricating documents to scare us because you know you are legally cornered." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I pulled up a highly detailed, legally verified commercial banking ledger on my shared screen and positioned it right next to the forensic credit card audit. "You do not have wealth managers, Dad," I corrected him, my tone perfectly level and completely devoid of empathy. "You have yes-men who gladly took your exorbitant retainer fees while watching you steer the family finances directly off a cliff. Let us look at the reality of your ironclad institution. 4 years ago, the trust began hemorrhaging cash. You were desperate to maintain the illusion of being a prominent high society patriarch. You needed liquid capital to fund Ashley's absurdly expensive lifestyle, her designer cars, her tuition at schools she rarely attended, and the massive catered parties you threw to impress your country club associates. But you had zero actual income-generating assets left. Your stock portfolio was a disaster of poorly researched impulsive trades." I highlighted a massive block of text on the banking ledger. The numbers glowed brightly against the stark white background. "So you did what every desperate man obsessed with appearances does," I continued. "You leveraged your physical assets. You secretly took out a series of high-interest commercial loans against the Wilson Family Trust. You used the sacred properties as collateral. You thought you could just borrow against the equity indefinitely to keep paying for your luxury vacations and your imported wine. But commercial loans require actual repayment, Dad. They require structured monthly capital that you simply did not possess." William swallowed hard. His face had gone from a flushed, angry red to a sickly, pale gray. He glanced nervously at Barbara, who was staring at the screen with absolute, unblinking horror. "When the money inevitably ran out, you completely ignored the problem," I said, driving the final nail into the coffin of his pride. "You threw the certified bank letters into the shredder. You ignored the persistent phone calls from the commercial lending department. You honestly believed that your last name and your country club membership made you completely immune to the consequences of default. You thought the bank would simply look the other way because you were William Wilson. But institutional lenders do not care about your social standing. They care about their balance sheets. 2 years ago, the bank officially classified your massive unpaid loans as toxic debt. They initiated a quiet internal foreclosure process on the trust." "You are lying!" William rasped his hands, trembling as he gripped the edge of his desk. "They would have seized the property. They would have sent the sheriff to lock the doors." "They did not need to send the sheriff immediately because they opted for a much faster, cleaner liquidation strategy," I explained, walking him through the basic mechanics of institutional finance. "Banks do not want to hold on to bad real estate. They want to clear their books. So they bundled your defaulted commercial loans and put the toxic debt up for sale on the private market. They auctioned off your entire financial existence to the highest corporate bidder. They completely circumvented you." I paused, letting the silence stretch out for several seconds. The only sound on the video call was William's ragged, uneven breathing. "My logistics firm is not just a warehouse, Dad," I said, bringing the conversation back to the present reality. "Vanguard Defense Logistics is a global operation. We have a highly aggressive subsidiary real estate holding company, Vanguard Real Estate, LLC. We utilize it to acquire properties across the country for supply chain infrastructure staging grounds and corporate housing. My acquisitions team constantly monitors the private market for bundled debt. 2 years ago, an analyst flagged a portfolio of foreclosed properties in Virginia. I reviewed the file personally. I recognized the addresses listed in the toxic debt bundle immediately. I stopped sharing the banking ledger and switched the screen to the final, indisputable proof. It was the official stamped county deed of ownership for the lake house. I did not hesitate, I stated flatly. I authorized the acquisition immediately. I used my own corporate capital to buy your bad debt from the bank for pennies on the dollar. I paid off the massive liens you ignored. I settled the back taxes you refused to pay. I bought the physical deed to the property out from under the collapsed family trust. I am the sole registered legal owner of the estate. William was completely paralyzed. His eyes darted across the digital deed, searching desperately for a loophole, a typo, a clerical error that would save him. There was nothing. The documentation was pristine. I do not live in your lake house, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. You live in my portfolio, you are a guest on my property. And as of this exact moment, your visitation privileges are permanently revoked. Barbara let out a sharp, choked gasp. Until this second, she had been sitting frozen beside William, her brain struggling to comprehend the sheer scale of the financial ruin unfolding on the screen. She was a woman who had built her entire existence around the perception of wealth. Her social standing, her friendships, her entire identity relied entirely on the illusion that they were untouchable. But my words had just triggered a terrifying realization in her mind. She turned slowly to face my father. Her hands were shaking so violently that her heavy diamond rings rattled against each other. "William," she whispered, her voice cracking with pure, unfiltered terror. "William, look at me. The family trust. The trust holds the lake house." My father refused to look at her. He kept his eyes glued to the monitor, his jaw locked tight. Barbara grabbed his shoulder, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit jacket. "William, tell me right now," she demanded, her voice rising in panic. "The trust does not just hold the lake property. The trust holds the primary estate. It holds this house." I watched the devastating truth settle over Barbara. The color completely drained from her face. I did not need to answer her question. The sickening silence from William confirmed everything she needed to know. When my father leveraged the family trust to secure his fraudulent commercial loans, he did not just put the vacation home on the line. He used their primary residence, the massive pillared suburban estate they were currently sitting in, as collateral. "Oh my God," Barbara breathed out, shrinking back into the sofa, as if the furniture itself had suddenly become toxic. "You lost this house too. You lost the primary estate. We do not own the roof over our heads. We are tenants." "That is correct, Mom," I chimed in, maintaining my cold professional distance. "The bank bundled the entire trust. Vanguard Real Estate, LLC, acquired the complete portfolio. You have been living in a house owned by my subsidiary for the last 2 years. I allowed you to stay there out of a misplaced sense of family loyalty. I quietly paid the property taxes and the maintenance fees while you paraded around acting like you were royalty. But since you made it explicitly clear on Saturday night that I am not family, I no longer have any obligation to provide you with free corporate housing. I will be serving you with a formal 30-day notice of eviction by the end of the week. You can pack your designer clothes and find a new place to live." Barbara let out a loud, genuine sob, burying her face in her hands. The complete destruction of her social empire was absolute. She was about to be evicted from her own showcase home by the daughter she had turned away at the door. Suddenly, the third square on the video grid flared to life. Ashley had reconnected. She had clearly been listening off camera, waiting to see if William could bully me into submission. When she realized the family fortune was entirely a fiction and that I held the deeds to their entire existence, her perfectly curated bridal persona completely fractured. She leaned into her laptop camera, her face streaked with ruined mascara, looking absolutely unhinged. "You are bluffing!" Ashley screamed, her voice echoing shrilly through the speakers. You are making all of this up to ruin my honeymoon because you are a sick, twisted person. You do not own anything. You are just trying to scare us. I looked at my younger sister, feeling nothing but profound pity for her aggressive ignorance. The documents are right there on the screen, Ashley. The county clerk validated them. The bank authorized the transfer. Your fairy tale is over. The money is gone. Ashley slammed her hands down on her desk. Fine, she yelled, her eyes wild and desperate. Fine. Even if you bought the debt, it does not matter. You think you have won, Tessa, but you have no idea who you are dealing with. You forgot about Colin. She let out a frantic, breathless laugh, clinging to the only perceived lifeline she had left. Colin's family is old money, Ashley declared, her voice dripping with venomous triumph. His father sits on the board of 3 different international banks. They have actual limitless wealth, not just some fake logistics company. They protect real family. When I tell Colin what you are trying to do to us, his father will step in. He will buy the debt right out from under you. He will hire a team of ruthless corporate litigators, and they will absolutely crush you in court. They will bury your pathetic little warehouse company in injunctions and lawsuits until you are forced to declare bankruptcy. They will ruin you, Tessa, and I am going to sit back and watch them do it. Ashley leaned closer to her webcam, her perfectly highlighted hair falling wildly around her face. Her voice was shrill, echoing with the desperate, clawing entitlement of someone who had never worked a single hard day in her entire life. Colin's parents absolutely adore me, she boasted, her eyes wide and manic with panic. They think I am the perfect addition to their family. They love my pedigree. They love my grace. They actually appreciate the refinement and elegance that I bring to their exclusive social circle, which is something a rigid, uncultured army grunt like you could never possibly understand. You spent your 20s sleeping in the dirt and barking orders at warehouse truck drivers. I spent mine building the exact social network required to completely obliterate you. I am organizing a formal dinner with Colin's parents this Saturday night. Ashley declared, a vicious, triumphant smirk spreading across her face. We are dining at the most exclusive private club in the city. I am going to sit down over a bottle of vintage Bordeaux and tell my new father-in-law exactly what kind of vindictive, jealous monster you really are. I am going to explain how you maliciously manipulated a bank error to steal our family home. And then I am going to ask him for a loan. He will write a check for the entire value of that property without even blinking. Ashley threw her hands up, gesturing wildly, her diamond wedding ring flashing in the light of her monitor. We are going to buy that toxic debt directly from your little warehouse company. We are going to rip the deed right out of your hands. Then my husband's lawyers will serve you with a proper legal eviction notice. But we will not stop there, Tessa. I am going to sue you for intentional infliction of emotional distress. I am going to sue you for attempting to ruin my wedding. Colin's father plays golf with senators. His mother chairs international charity galas. They do not tolerate extortion from bitter, estranged siblings. They protect real family. I will have their legal team drag you through years of litigation until your pathetic logistics firm bleeds dry paying legal fees. You think you are a brilliant tactician, but you just brought a spreadsheet to a billionaire's fight. They will absolutely crush you in court. I did not raise my voice to match her hysteria. I did not defend my military service or my business. I let her finish her frantic, desperate monologue. I let the silence hang heavily in the digital space for 5 long seconds, watching the frantic energy pulse through my sister's shoulders. Then I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the cold, mechanical expression of a predator watching its prey willingly walk into a steel trap. That sounds like a wonderful plan, Ashley, I said, my voice completely smooth and undeniably lethal. A formal dinner with your wealthy new in-laws is exactly what this situation requires. Transparency is so important when merging 2 prominent families. I would hate for Colin's parents to invest their considerable capital without performing the proper due diligence. So I'm going to make this very easy for you. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on my mahogany desk, locking my eyes directly onto my camera lens. I want you to text me the exact address of this private club. I want the reservation time and the table number. You do not need to worry about asking Colin's father for a loan, because I am going to attend that dinner. I am going to walk right up to your table, and I am going to bring the original physical property deeds. I will bring the bank foreclosure notices. I am going to bring the itemized receipts showing exactly how your lavish rehearsal dinner was funded by defrauding a federal contractor. And just to ensure Colin's father fully understands the integrity of the family his son just married into, I will bring the 50-page forensic audit detailing exactly how you funded your honeymoons and designer clothes. We can lay everything out on the white tablecloth right next to the vintage Bordeaux. I will gladly let Colin's mother review the fraudulent invoices you submitted for your bridal gown. Ashley's triumphant smirk instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. She opened her mouth to scream another insult, but I did not give her the opportunity. I reached out and clicked the red button at the bottom of my screen. The video conference ended immediately, cutting off her voice and plunging my office into total absolute silence. The digital ambush was complete. Now it was time to prepare the physical ammunition. I did not waste a single second celebrating the victory. I transitioned instantly into logistical execution mode. I opened my secure encrypted drive and sent a direct command to my high-speed office printer. The machine immediately hummed to life, churning out thick, crisp pages of undeniable financial evidence. I stood up and walked over to my heavy steel filing cabinet. I was not going to a formal dinner with empty verbal threats. I operated on absolute documented reality. I pulled out a heavy black leather binder. Inside lay the original watermarked property deeds for the lake house legally transferred and officially recorded to Vanguard Real Estate, LLC. I placed them carefully on the center of my desk. Next came the foreclosure notices, complete with the bank's certified seals and the grim, undeniable timeline of my father's absolute financial negligence. But the property deeds and the corporate credit card audit were only the beginning. William had claimed his trust was an ironclad institution. He had claimed the commercial loans were a standard business practice. That was the comforting lie he told himself to sleep at night. The truth was far more sinister, and I had the exact paperwork required to prove it. I reached deep into the back of the filing cabinet and extracted a separate thick red folder. This was the exact reason my father's high-priced lawyer had fled the video call in absolute sweating terror. When I purchased the bad debt from the commercial lender, my logistics firm inherently acquired all the original loan application files. I had my internal corporate compliance team review every single page. What they found went far beyond bad investments or careless, arrogant spending. I opened the red folder and spread the heavily watermarked documents across my desk. They were the original commercial loan applications William had submitted to the bank 5 years ago. Next to them, I placed the actual historical tax returns for the Wilson Family Trust. The numbers did not match. They were not even in the same stratosphere. To secure the massive lines of credit needed to maintain his country club facade, William had systematically and deliberately inflated the trust's assets. He had fabricated massive income streams that simply did not exist. He had forged the signatures of non-existent board members to push the paperwork through processing. He had submitted entirely fraudulent tax documents to a federally insured financial institution. He had committed textbook, undeniable wire fraud and bank fraud. He had not just bankrupted the family trust. He had committed major federal felonies just to keep Ashley dressed in designer labels and to keep Barbara stocked with imported champagne. I took a red felt pen and methodically circled the forged signatures. I highlighted the completely fabricated asset columns in bright yellow. I cross-referenced every fraudulent commercial loan application with the corresponding date of a major family purchase. When William bought the new imported luxury SUV for my mother, he filed a fake quarterly earnings report with the bank the exact same week. When Ashley demanded a $60,000 engagement ring, William forged the signature of a non-existent trust guarantor to secure a secondary line of credit. It was a masterclass in pathetic, desperate criminality. I printed the digital metadata. I printed the email timestamps. I left absolutely zero room for interpretation, negotiation, or denial. I attached these fraudulent applications directly to the massive credit card audit. I was building a comprehensive chronological timeline of generational theft. I placed every single document into a reinforced, waterproof tactical briefcase. I organized them with military precision, using color-coded index tabs for instant, effortless retrieval. If Ashley truly wanted to bring her billionaire in-laws into the crossfire, I was going to hand them a fully documented federal indictment right along with their dessert menus. The afternoon slowly faded into evening. The sun dipped below the horizon outside my office window, casting long, sharp shadows across my polished floor. I sat perfectly still at my desk, reviewing the timeline over and over, anticipating every possible counterattack Colin's family lawyers might attempt to deploy. I was ready for a brutal, drawn-out legal war. I was ready to absolutely destroy the illusion of the Wilson family legacy in open court if they dared to challenge my ownership. The soft, sudden chiming sound of a digital notification broke the heavy silence of the room. I glanced at my secondary monitor. It was not an email from my corporate logistics team. It was not a frantic text message from a panicking family member. It was a direct private message alert on my professional LinkedIn profile. I frowned slightly, my eyes narrowing at the screen. I rarely use the platform for direct communication, keeping it strictly for corporate networking, vendor acquisition, and supply chain logistics. I moved my mouse and clicked open the notification tab. The sender's name appeared in bold black letters at the top of the screen. Colin Sterling, my sister's new husband, the golden boy, the heir to the massive banking fortune. The man Ashley had just claimed would unleash total legal hellfire upon me to protect her honor. His profile picture showed a handsome, polished man in a bespoke suit standing confidently in front of a sleek corporate banking logo. He was the kind of man who was meticulously trained to spot a bad investment from a mile away. He was the kind of man whose entire family fortune was built on ruthless, unforgiving risk assessment. I clicked the message open, fully expecting a barrage of aggressive legal threats, a strict demand for immediate surrender, or a pompous declaration of his family's vast, untouchable resources. I expected the arrogant bluster of a wealthy man blindly defending his newly minted lying wife. Instead, the message contained only two short, incredibly urgent sentences. "We need to talk before this dinner on Saturday," the message read. "I found the audit you emailed to the lawyer." I did not reply with a lengthy explanation or a defensive justification. I simply typed an address and a time. It was a small, independent coffee roaster located on a quiet, unassuming street in Georgetown, far removed from the polished corporate banking hubs and the exclusive country club lounges where his family usually operated. It was neutral territory. I arrived 15 minutes early, securing a corner booth with my back to the wall, giving me a clear view of the entrance. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer, my posture relaxed, but completely alert. I placed the reinforced waterproof tactical briefcase on the table in front of me. Colin Sterling walked through the glass door exactly on time. I recognized him immediately from the excessive wedding photos Ashley had plastered across social media. But the man walking toward my table bore very little resemblance to the glowing, triumphant groom from those pictures. The heir to a massive international banking fortune was supposed to exude effortless confidence and untouchable grace. Instead, Colin looked like a man who had not slept in days. His expensive navy suit looked slightly rumpled. The knot of his silk tie was pulled loose. He had dark, heavy bags under his eyes, and his skin carried a pale, sickly pallor. He spotted me in the corner, hesitated for a fraction of a second, and then crossed the room. He slid into the booth across from me, moving with a rigid mechanical stiffness. He did not offer to shake my hand. He simply stared at me, his eyes scanning my face, my tailored clothes, and my steady, unwavering expression. He looked incredibly confused. "You do not look like an addict," Colin said. His voice was hoarse, stripped entirely of the polished charm I expected from a man of his pedigree. I did not react to the bizarre statement. I maintained steady eye contact, waiting for him to explain himself. "Sterling sent an automated termination of counsel notice to every email address associated with your family's legal file." Colin continued, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them together on the table. "My email was on that list because I was the one paying his retainer." Sterling attached a heavily redacted file to his withdrawal notice citing a massive conflict of interest and potential criminal exposure. I opened the file. I read the audit. I read the spreadsheet detailing a corporate credit card. He stopped, taking a jagged, uneven breath. He looked around the quiet coffee shop as if making sure no one was listening before leaning closer to me. "Ashley told me you were in a lockdown rehabilitation center," Colin whispered, the devastation cracking through his voice. "She told my parents that you had been struggling with severe, uncontrollable substance abuse for years. She said your military service had broken you, that you were completely unstable, and that you had been violently estranged from the family because you kept stealing from your father to fund your addiction." That is the story she told my entire family at the rehearsal dinner when my mother asked why you were not standing at the altar with her. Ashley cried in my mother's arms. She played the role of the tragic, supportive, heartbroken sister so perfectly. I sat perfectly still. The sheer magnitude of Ashley's sociopathic lying was breathtaking. She had not simply hidden my existence, she had actively weaponized my military service and completely assassinated my character to secure sympathy from her wealthy new in-laws. Collins swallowed hard, his eyes dropping to the table. But the lie goes so much deeper than just an excuse for your absence. A month before the wedding, Ashley came to my parents in absolute hysterics. She claimed that your treatment facility was threatening to kick you out onto the street. She said William's assets were temporarily tied up in a complex trust negotiation and that he could not liquidate the funds in time. She told my father that if you were discharged from that facility, you would be dead within a week. She begged him for a bridge loan. He looked back up at me, his expression twisting with a sickening realization. My father does not negotiate with human lives. He wrote a check for $35,000 that exact same day. He registered it as a private charitable donation to your supposed medical facility to save your life. Ashley took that check. And then I read your audit. I read the exact dollar amounts. I did not offer him a sympathetic smile. I did not offer platitudes. I simply unclasped the heavy steel locks on my tactical briefcase. I flipped the lid open and extracted the thick, color-coded file. "You are a banker, Colin," I said, my voice clinical, precise, and completely devoid of emotion. "You possess the financial literacy required to understand exactly what you are about to look at. I am not going to ask you to take my word against your wife's tears. I am going to show you the absolute, undeniable reality of the family you just married into." I slid a stack of physical documents across the table. I placed my official military deployment records down first. "These are my federal service records," I stated. "As you can clearly read, during the exact time frame Ashley claimed I was violently stealing from my father to fund a fictional addiction, I was actively deployed in a hostile combat zone, managing forward operating logistics. I was not in a rehabilitation center. I was in body armor." I placed the corresponding bank statements next to the deployment records. "This is the direct deposit history for my combat hazard pay," I continued. "And right next to it is the ledger for the Vanguard Corporate Emergency Credit Card, a card that is strictly governed by federal contracting regulations." I watched Colin's eyes scan the pages. He was a man raised in high finance. He processed the data instantly. I saw the exact moment his brain connected the dates on my deployment records to the dates of the massive, exorbitant charges on the corporate card. He saw the $12,000 Parisian luxury vacation. He saw the country club memberships. He saw the imported orchids and the cases of vintage champagne. He was looking at a documented timeline of generational theft. "Now let us examine the charity of your father," I said softly. I pulled out a specific highlighted invoice and placed it directly in front of him. It was the billing statement from the exclusive country club where he had recently celebrated his wedding reception. "Ashley told your parents she needed $35,000 for a medical facility," I said, pointing directly to the final total on the catering invoice. "Here is the final bill for your wedding venue. The total is exactly $35,000. William promised to pay for the wedding to maintain his facade of wealth in front of your family, but William is completely bankrupt." When the venue threatened to cancel the reception due to non-payment, Ashley panicked. She fabricated a horrific, degrading lie about my mental health to extort your parents into covering her father's bounced checks. She used your family's genuine compassion to pay for her catering. Colin stared at the catering invoice. His skin turned a shade of ash. The reality of the grift was absolute. His wife had not just lied to him, she had actively, maliciously defrauded his family to maintain an illusion. "But I am not finished," I said, my tone hardening. "I am going to show you exactly why William is bankrupt, because it directly impacts your family's banking empire." I pulled out the red folder, the folder containing William's original commercial loan applications and the historical tax returns for the Wilson Family Trust. I spread them out across the small coffee shop table. "Your father sits on the board of international banks," I said, watching Colin's eyes drop to the heavily watermarked financial forms. "So I know you understand the severe federal implications of bank fraud." To secure the commercial loans required to fund Ashley's lifestyle, William systematically falsified the trust's asset column. He fabricated massive income streams. He forged the signatures of non-existent guarantors. He submitted entirely fraudulent tax documents to a federally insured institution. I pointed to the highlighted discrepancies, drawing clear, undeniable lines between the fake tax returns and the approved commercial loans. When the money ran out, William defaulted. I explained, delivering the final crushing sequence of events. The bank quietly foreclosed on the trust. They bundled the toxic debt, including the deed to the lake house and the deed to the primary suburban estate, and they auctioned it off to the highest bidder on the private market. I slid the final document across the table. The official government-stamped county deed of ownership. "My logistics firm purchased that debt," I stated flatly. "I own the lake house. I own the primary estate. Your new wife and her parents are currently living in my corporate portfolio as non-paying tenants. Ashley is planning to host a formal dinner with your parents this Saturday. She intends to ask your father for a massive loan to buy this debt from me, claiming I stole the property through a bank error. She intends to use your family's vast resources to fight a legal war against a federal contractor, dragging your family's pristine reputation into a radioactive federal fraud investigation." Colin sat perfectly still. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply stared at the documents spread across the table. He was looking at the complete, undeniable destruction of his marriage. He was looking at a sociopathic grift that had ensnared his parents. He was looking at a family of arrogant, entitled criminals who had viewed his banking fortune as nothing more than a permanent ATM. The silence in the coffee shop felt thick and suffocating. The faint sound of the espresso machine hissing in the background seemed to belong to an entirely different universe. Slowly, deliberately, Colin reached out. He gathered the deployment records, the credit card audit, the catering invoice, the forged commercial loan applications, and the physical property deeds. He stacked them together with precise, methodical movements. He tapped the edges of the paper against the table, perfectly aligning the corners, his banking instincts taking over in the face of total emotional devastation. He placed the thick stack of documents into the center of the table and closed the file cover. When he finally looked up at me, the confusion and exhaustion were completely gone from his eyes. They had been replaced by a cold, terrifying, absolute fury. It was the look of a man who possessed immense generational power and who had just realized he had been played for a fool. Colin rested his hand flat on top of the file. He did not raise his voice. He spoke with the quiet, lethal certainty of a man preparing to initiate total warfare. "Can I bring this file to the family dinner on Friday?" Colin asked. I looked at the shattered banking air, recognizing the exact moment a predator decides to strike. I gave him a single slow nod. I was counting on it. Friday evening descended on the city with a cold, biting wind, but inside the mahogany-paneled walls of the Capitol Grill, the atmosphere was entirely insulated by money. The private dining room I approached was a masterpiece of modern architectural exclusivity. It featured 3 solid, soundproof walls of dark wood and a 4th wall made entirely of thick, tempered glass that looked out over the main dining floor. It allowed the occupants to be seen by the general public while remaining completely untouchable, the exact kind of performative display my father craved. I stood in the shadowed hallway just outside the glass, perfectly positioned in a blind spot. I watched the scene unfolding inside the room with clinical detachment. William sat at the head of the long oak table wearing a bespoke suit. He no longer owned the rights to holding a crystal glass of Cabernet. He was leaning toward Colin's father, Arthur Sterling, a man whose quiet, understated posture radiated actual generational wealth. Barbara sat next to Eleanor Sterling, nodding sympathetically as Ashley held court at the center of the table. Even through the thick glass, the pantomime was painfully obvious. Ashley was dabbing at the corners of her eyes with a linen napkin, playing the role of the exhausted, heartbroken sister. She reached out and placed her hand over Eleanor's, her face a mask of tragic concern. She was setting the hook. She was painting the picture of my fabricated demise, weaving the elaborate lie about my supposed addiction and the agonizing toll it was taking on the family's finances. William seamlessly took the baton from his weeping daughter. I watched him set his wine glass down with a heavy, dramatic sigh. He pressed his hands together, adopting the solemn, burdened expression of a patriarch making a terrible sacrifice. He was undoubtedly feeding Arthur Sterling the precise, calculated script they had rehearsed. He was explaining how the Wilson family trust was temporarily frozen, how the liquid assets were tied up in emergency medical trusts for my fictional rehabilitation, and how he just needed a temporary multi-million-dollar bridge loan to secure a real estate asset that had mistakenly fallen into foreclosure due to a clerical error. They were orchestrating a high society shakedown, using my stolen identity as the emotional leverage to pry open the Sterling family vault. Colin sat silently at the opposite end of the table. He was staring down at his untouched steak, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles fluttered beneath his skin. He did not look at his wife. He did not look at his parents. He simply waited. I reached down and smoothed the fabric of my jacket. I was not wearing my tailored corporate suits tonight. I was wearing my formal, pristine military dress uniform. Every brass button was polished to a mirror shine. The fabric was immaculately pressed, holding sharp, unforgiving creases. The rack of commendations and service medals resting over my left breast pocket gleamed under the amber restaurant lighting. I wore the uniform of a commanding officer in the United States military, projecting absolute, undeniable authority. I was the living, breathing antithesis of the twitching, unstable addict Ashley had just described. I stepped out of the shadows, grasped the heavy brass handles of the double doors, and pushed them open. The doors swung inward with a smooth, heavy glide. I stepped across the threshold, letting the heavy doors close behind me with a soft, final click that sealed the room. The reaction was instantaneous and entirely chaotic. Ashley was mid-sentence, a perfectly practiced tear rolling down her cheek as she spoke to her mother-in-law. Her eyes flicked toward the door, registering my presence. The words died in her throat. She froze, her hand hovering in the air, holding the linen napkin, her face instantly draining of all blood. She looked as if she had just seen a ghost manifest over her dinner plate. William abruptly stopped talking. His head snapped toward the entrance. The color vanished from his flushed cheeks, replaced by a sickening, chalky pallor. The confident, wealthy patriarch completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, cornered fraud. Arthur and Eleanor Sterling looked up at me, their expressions shifting from polite engagement to total bewilderment. They looked at my crisp uniform. They looked at my completely sober, disciplined posture. They looked at the medals representing years of dedicated overseas combat logistics. Their minds clearly struggled to reconcile the commanding officer standing in front of them with the pathetic, drug-addicted degenerate Ashley had just spent 40 minutes describing in vivid, agonizing detail. Tessa, Arthur Sterling said, his voice thick with genuine confusion. Ashley just told us you were in a secure medical facility upstate. I did not get the chance to answer him. The sheer, overwhelming panic of the moment finally shattered Barbara's fragile composure. The illusion was collapsing right in front of her wealthy peers, and her brain defaulted to pure, unhinged hysterics. Barbara pushed her chair back so violently it tipped over and crashed against the hardwood floor. She lunged to her feet, waving her arms frantically toward the glass wall, desperately trying to flag down the maitre d' standing in the main dining room. Security. Barbara hissed, her voice a sharp, venomous whisper intended to preserve some semblance of decorum while executing total panic. Somebody get security in here right now. She is not supposed to be here. She is having an episode. She turned her frantic, wide eyes toward Eleanor Sterling, attempting to forcefully maintain the lie. I am so sorry. Eleanor, Barbara babbled, stepping physically between me and the table as if I were carrying a live grenade. This is exactly what we were talking about. She is completely unstable. She breaks out of her treatment centers and steals military uniforms to impersonate officers. It is a severe psychological delusion. She is dangerous. We need to have her removed before she becomes violent. Barbara took a step toward me, her hands raised, attempting to physically herd me back out the door before I could speak a single word. You need to leave, Tessa. She gritted through her teeth, her eyes wide with a terrifying, desperate rage. Get out of here right now before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. I did not take a single step backward. I stood my ground, my hands clasped loosely behind my back in a standard military parade rest, watching her unravel. I let her spin her frantic, easily disprovable lies directly in front of the people she was trying to rob. Before Barbara could take another step toward me, a chair scraped loudly against the floorboards at the far end of the table. Colin stood up. He did not look like the compliant, supportive husband who had sat silently through the rehearsal dinner. He looked like a man who had spent the last 48 hours reviewing a forensic audit of his wife's pathological deception. He looked completely and utterly lethal. Sit down, Barbara Colin commanded. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a crack of a whip. It carried the absolute, unquestionable authority of the Sterling family empire. It was an order, not a request. Barbara froze in her tracks, her mouth hanging open. She looked at Colin, completely stunned by the aggressive tone of her normally polite son-in-law. But Colin, she stammered, her hands fluttering in the air. She is having a psychotic break. We need to protect the family. I said sit down, Colin repeated, his eyes locking onto hers with a cold, terrifying intensity that left absolutely no room for negotiation. She is not having a psychotic break. She is not dangerous. And she is certainly not trespassing. Colin stepped away from his chair and walked slowly down the length of the long oak table, moving past his bewildered parents, past my sweating, paralyzed father, and past his trembling, hyperventilating wife. He stopped right next to me, turning to face his in-laws with a look of absolute disgust. She is my guest, Colin stated, his voice echoing cleanly off the glass walls. I invited her here tonight. Arthur Sterling frowned, looking from his son to my immaculate uniform. Colin, what is going on here? Arthur asked, his sharp banking instincts clearly sensing the massive discrepancy in the narrative. Ashley just spent half the evening detailing Tessa's severe medical crisis. Why is your guest wearing a perfectly tailored dress uniform? Because everything you have been told tonight, and everything you have been told since the moment I introduced Ashley into our family, is a complete and total fabrication, Colin answered, keeping his eyes entirely fixed on his wife. Ashley let out a small, strangled whimper. She shrank back into her leather chair, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. The blood had entirely left her face, leaving her looking like a wax mannequin. She realized with absolute crushing certainty that the secret coffee shop meeting had taken place. She realized the trap had sprung, and the steel jaws were currently snapping shut around her entire life. Colin did not offer her a shred of mercy. He reached down and unclasped the brass locks of the heavy leather briefcase resting next to his chair. My father-in-law did not experience a minor cash flow disruption, Colin said, addressing his parents while glaring at William. He did not suffer a clerical error at the bank. He systematically defrauded commercial lenders by filing fabricated tax returns and inflating the assets of a bankrupt family trust to fund his country club lifestyle. He defaulted on every single loan he took out, resulting in the bank foreclosing on their vacation property and the primary residence they are currently living in. Colin reached into the briefcase. He pulled out the massive thick file I had handed him in Georgetown. The edges of the color-coded index tabs stuck out sharply from the sides. And my wife did not ask you for a $35,000 bridge loan to save her sister from a medical discharge. Colin continued, his voice dropping to a low, furious growl. Her sister is a decorated military logistics officer who spent the last 2 years running supply chains in active combat zones. Ashley asked you for that money because her father's checks bounced and she needed your charity to pay the catering bill for our wedding reception. Colin lifted the 50-page forensic audit high into the air. He held it there for a fraction of a second, letting the immense weight of the documentation hang over the room. Then, with a swift, violent motion, Colin dropped the massive file directly onto the center of the dining table. It hit the solid oak wood with a heavy, deafening thud that rattled the fine china and caused the red wine to splash violently against the sides of the crystal glasses. The echo of the heavy folder hitting the solid oak table faded away, leaving a ringing, suffocating silence in its wake. Drops of spilled Cabernet sank into the pristine white tablecloth like fresh blood. No one moved. No one dared to speak. The ambient noise of the main dining room outside the soundproof glass seemed to belong to an entirely different universe. Inside the private suite, the carefully curated illusion of the Wilson family had just violently shattered. Mother, father. Colin spoke, his voice carrying a chilling, absolute calm that commanded total attention. I apologize for the abrupt disruption to our evening. I know we came here tonight to discuss a financial partnership between our families. But before you write another check, you need to know exactly who you are sitting across from. You need to understand the reality of the people I foolishly married into. Eleanor Sterling stared at the thick, color-coded audit resting next to her wine glass. She looked from the folder up to her son, her elegant features tightened with confusion. She then shifted her gaze to me, taking in the sharp-pressed lines of my military dress uniform and the polished brass medals resting over my heart. The cognitive dissonance was clearly overwhelming her. Colin, what is this? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ashley just spent the last 40 minutes telling us that her sister was currently undergoing emergency medical treatment. She told us Tessa was locked in a secure facility, battling a severe life-threatening addiction. She said she broke into your house and stole heirlooms to fund her habits. That is exactly what Ashley told me, Colin replied, turning his cold gaze down toward his wife. That is the story she spun for our entire family at the rehearsal dinner to explain why her only sibling was absent from the wedding. It was a tragic, compelling narrative designed to extract maximum sympathy. But it was a complete, calculated lie. Colin tapped his index finger sharply against the cover of the forensic audit. A month before the wedding, Ashley came to you in absolute hysterics. Colin continued, addressing his father. She claimed that Tessa's treatment facility was threatening to discharge her onto the street due to a lapse in insurance. She claimed William's assets were temporarily tied up in a trust negotiation and that they needed immediate liquid capital to save her sister's life. You wrote a check for $35,000 that very afternoon. You registered it as a private charitable donation because you are a good, honorable man who wanted to help your future daughter-in-law save her family. Arthur Sterling sat perfectly rigid in his leather chair, his keen, analytical eyes locked onto Colin. And where did that money actually go? Arthur asked, his voice dropping an octave. Colin did not hesitate. He opened the file and slid a highlighted, itemized invoice directly across the polished oak to his father. It went to the country club, Colin stated flatly. The $35,000 you donated to save an imaginary addict was exactly the amount required to cover the final catering bill for our wedding reception. William is completely bankrupt. His checks bounced. The venue threatened to cancel the reception. So Ashley fabricated a horrific, degrading lie about her sister's mental health to extort you into paying for her floral arrangements and her champagne tower. Ashley let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She pressed both of her hands over her mouth, her eyes darting frantically between Colin and his parents. Barbara shrank back into her seat, looking as though she might physically vomit. The pure, unadulterated sociopathy of the grift hung in the air, sickening and undeniable. But the fraud goes far beyond a single stolen check, Colin said, his voice rising with a controlled, righteous fury. He turned the pages of the audit, exposing the highlighted bank statements and the copies of the forged commercial loan applications. The Wilsons did not just scam us. They have been engaged in systematic generational theft for the better part of a decade. William committed textbook wire fraud. He forged signatures to secure commercial loans against a trust he had already drained. He leveraged the family estate to buy designer cars and luxury vacations, and then he let the bank foreclose on the entire portfolio. Colin pointed directly at me, his hands steady and resolute. Tessa did not steal from them, Colin declared to the room. They stole from her. While Ashley was telling you that her sister was a dangerous, unstable degenerate, Tessa was actively deployed in a hostile combat zone. She is a decorated logistics officer. And while she was downrange wearing body armor and managing federal supply chains, William and Ashley were intercepting her combat hazard pay. They used her military direct deposits to fund their country club memberships. They drained her accounts to pay for Ashley's designer handbags. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The polite high society confusion vanished, replaced by an intense volatile energy. William could no longer handle the exposure. The fragile ego that had driven him to commit massive federal fraud finally snapped. He slammed both of his hands down onto the dining table, rattling the silverware. He pushed himself to his feet, his face flushing a dangerous dark purple. "You do not understand anything about our world," William bellowed, pointing a shaking accusatory finger at Colin. He completely ignored the evidence on the table, defaulting to the arrogant, blustering entitlement he had utilized his entire life. "You sit there in your high ivory tower judging us, but you have no idea what it takes to survive in this circle. We had a certain standard to maintain. We had social obligations. Do you know what happens to a family when they lose their standing? Do you know how quickly these people turn on you?" William swept his hand toward his wife and daughter, demanding validation for his crimes. The money from the trust, the loans, even Tessa's accounts, those were necessary family sacrifices. They were investments in our future. We did what we had to do to ensure Ashley could secure a proper future, to ensure she could walk into your elite social circles and belong. You should be thanking me. I built the perfect daughter for your family. I just needed a temporary bridge to finalize the transition. It is not theft if it stays within the family. Arthur Sterling stood up. He did not rush. He did not slam his hands on the table. He simply rose from his chair with a slow, deliberate physical presence that instantly commanded the entire room. Arthur Sterling had built his international banking empire only after a long, distinguished career in the armed forces, retiring with 2 stars as a general in the United States Army. He possessed a deeply ingrained, unbreakable code of honor. He tolerated ruthless business negotiations, but he harbored an absolute visceral hatred for cowardice and betrayal. Arthur stared at William. The disgust radiating from the older man was so intense it felt like a physical weight pressing down on the room. "I commanded men and women who died in the mud for this country," Arthur said. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that cut right through William's frantic blustering. "I have written letters to grieving mothers. I have stood over flag-draped caskets. The uniform your daughter is currently wearing represents honor, discipline, and a willingness to lay down one's life for the person standing next to you." Arthur took a single step forward, leaning slightly over the table. "You stole from a soldier while she was deployed in a combat zone," Arthur stated, his words dripping with pure, unfiltered contempt. "You siphoned blood money from your own flesh and blood so your spoiled, entitled daughter could buy shoes and parade around a country club. You are not a patriarch protecting his family. You are a pathetic, cowardly parasite." Arthur slowly turned his head, deliberately breaking eye contact with William. "I will not look at you for another second," Arthur commanded. "You disgust me. If you ever contact my family or my bank again, I will personally ensure federal prosecutors have this entire file on their desks before breakfast." William collapsed back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. The bluster completely vanished. The realization that he had just threatened and insulted a retired general and a billionaire banking executive finally penetrated his thick skull. He was ruined. There was no social circle left to save. Ashley realized the exact same thing. The massive, wealthy empire she thought she had conquered was actively turning its weapons upon her. She looked at Colin's hardened face, then at Arthur's disgusted posture. Her mind desperately scrambled for a lifeline. She reverted to the only defense mechanism she had ever successfully deployed. She burst into violent theatrical tears. Ashley let out a loud, heaving sob, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with exaggerated force. She pushed her chair back and practically threw herself toward Colin, reaching out to grasp his suit jacket. "Colin, please." Ashley wept, her voice breaking into a high, frantic whine. "You have to understand. You have to listen to me. I was so terrified. I loved you so much and your family was so perfect and so rich and so intimidating. They made me feel like I was not enough. I just wanted everything to be perfect for you. I wanted to be the perfect bride. I wanted to give you the flawless wedding you deserved." She looked up at him, her mascara running down her cheeks, pleading for the unconditional grace he had always given her. "My father told me he had the money. He promised me. When the checks bounced, I panicked. I just panicked, Colin. I did not want to lose you. I made a terrible mistake, but I did it out of love. We can fix this. We can pay the money back. Please do not look at me like that. I am your wife." Colin looked down at her hands gripping his jacket. He did not pull away. He simply stared at her with an expression of profound, chilling emptiness. The love, the warmth, the gentle patience that had defined their entire relationship had been surgically removed. "You are right about one thing," Colin said, his voice a quiet, dead whisper in the chaotic room. "You are not enough." Colin reached up with his right hand. He grasped the thick, heavy gold wedding band resting on his left ring finger. With a single smooth motion, he pulled the ring off. He held the gold band suspended in the air for a brief second. Ashley stopped crying, her eyes locking onto the piece of metal in absolute paralyzed horror. She understood the finality of the gesture. She realized that tears could not extinguish the fire she had started. Colin lowered his hand and set the wedding ring precisely on top of the 50-page forensic audit folder resting in the center of the table. The gold clinked softly against the glossy cardboard cover. "I am filing for an annulment based on extreme premeditated financial fraud," Colin announced to the room. "I will have my attorneys coordinate directly with Tessa to ensure every single dollar you stole from her deployment pay is fully recovered before this marriage is legally erased from existence. Do not ever speak to me again." The heavy, deafening thud of the 50-page forensic audit hitting the solid oak table echoed off the soundproof glass walls of the private dining room. The heavy gold wedding band rested perfectly still on top of the glossy cardboard cover, a shining absolute monument to the total destruction of my sister's fraudulent empire. Colin Sterling did not wait for a response. He did not look back to witness the devastation he had just unleashed. He simply turned on his heel, adjusted the cuffs of his tailored navy suit, and walked deliberately toward the heavy glass doors of the private suite. Arthur and Eleanor Sterling immediately flanked their son, closing ranks with the effortless, synchronized precision of old money protecting its own. They did not spare a single backward glance at the Wilson family. Ashley let out a piercing, guttural shriek. The sound tore through her throat, raw and utterly unhinged, completely devoid of the curated high society elegance she had spent months perfecting. She scrambled out of her leather chair, her expensive silk dress catching on the armrest and tearing with a sharp rip. She lunged across the room, desperately grasping at the empty air behind her departing husband. "Colin, wait!" Ashley screamed, her voice cracking into a hysterical, breathless sob. "Colin, please do not leave me. I can explain everything. I will do whatever you want." She hit the heavy glass doors just as they clicked shut behind the Sterlings. Ashley slapped her palms flat against the thick, tempered glass, her ruined, tear-streaked face pressing against the transparent barrier. Outside in the main dining room, Colin and his parents strode purposefully through the sea of elegantly dressed patrons, never once breaking their stride. Ashley pounded her fists against the glass, her diamond engagement ring loudly striking the pane, begging for a man who had already erased her from his existence. The wealthy patrons sitting at the candlelit tables in the main dining area stopped eating. Dozens of highly influential, powerful people turned their heads to watch the pathetic spectacle unfolding inside our transparent box. They stared at Ashley, watching her mascara run down her cheeks in dark, muddy streaks as she clawed uselessly at the door. She was completely exposed, displayed like a frantic trapped animal in a luxury zoo exhibit. At the dining table, the reality of the situation finally crashed down upon William. He stared blankly at the gold ring resting on the audit folder. The bridge loan was gone. The billionaire's safety net had completely evaporated. The commercial fraud he had committed was now fully documented and exposed to a family that possessed the power to bury him in federal litigation for the rest of his natural life. There was no country club charm left to deploy. There were no more lies to spin. He was staring directly at a federal prison sentence and absolute unmitigated bankruptcy. His paralyzing fear instantly metastasized into a violent, explosive rage. William let out a primal roar. He grabbed the heavy edge of the oak dining table with both hands. He kicked his chair backward so violently it toppled over and crashed against the hardwood floor. He lunged across the center of the table, his eyes wide and bloodshot, aiming directly for me. His sudden, erratic movement swept across the pristine table setting. Fine bone china shattered onto the floor. Crystal wine glasses snapped at their stems. A full bottle of vintage Cabernet tipped over, sending a dark crimson wave of red wine violently across the white linen tablecloth. The liquid splashed over the edges of the forged commercial loan application, soaking into the paper like fresh blood. "You ruined us!" William bellowed, his face contorted into a mask of pure, irrational hatred. He scrambled over the ruined dinner plates, his arms flailing wildly as he desperately tried to reach my throat. "You vindictive, jealous monster! You destroyed your own sister. You destroyed this family. I will kill you for this." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of fear. Years of operating in hostile, unpredictable combat zones had conditioned my heart rate to remain perfectly steady under fire. I simply shifted my weight slightly to the left, standing my ground with perfect military posture. William, heavily intoxicated, overweight, and entirely blinded by his own pathetic rage, lost his footing on the spilled wine. He slipped hard against the polished oak wood, his arms crashing uselessly onto the table mere inches from my decorated dress uniform. He lay sprawled across the ruined dinner setting, gasping for breath, his expensive suit jacket soaking up the spilled Cabernet. I looked down at the man who had spent his entire life valuing an illusion of wealth over his own daughter. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No pity, no anger, only the cold, clinical satisfaction of a successfully executed operation. I reached inside the inner breast pocket of my uniform jacket. I pulled out a single crisp, legally notarized document. It was sealed inside a clear plastic protective sleeve to ensure it remained pristine. I held it deliberately in the air, making sure the harsh overhead light caught the official county watermark. Then, with a smooth, calculated motion, I dropped the document directly onto the table, sliding it through the spilled wine until it stopped right beneath William's gasping red face. "Since you defaulted on the debt, drained the accounts, and just admitted to financial fraud in front of multiple witnesses, I am officially foreclosing." I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute undeniable authority. "You have 30 days to pack." Barbara, who had been sitting frozen in her chair, let out a choked, horrifying gasp. She leaned forward, her shaking hands hovering over the plastic sleeve. She read the bold black letters printed across the top of the document. Official 30-day notice to vacate. The complete, devastating reality of her situation finally breached her profound state of denial. The illusion was dead. The primary estate, the massive pillared suburban mansion where she hosted her elite charity galas and lorded her perceived superiority over her neighbors, was legally gone. They were not homeowners negotiating a temporary setback. They were delinquent tenants being formally evicted by their own estranged daughter. "No," Barbara whispered, her voice completely hollow, her eyes fixed blindly on the eviction notice. No, this cannot be happening. Where are we supposed to go? We have no money. We have nowhere to live. You cannot take my house. I already did, Mom. I replied, my tone perfectly level. And the clock starts right now. Before Barbara could launch into another hysterical fit of denial, the heavy glass doors of the private suite swung open. It was not Colin returning. It was the general manager of the Capitol Grill, a tall, impeccably dressed man, radiating furious professional authority. He was flanked by two large, imposing security guards wearing dark suits and earpieces. The chaotic, violent display inside the glass room had completely disrupted the exclusive dining experience of the entire restaurant. The screaming, the shattering glass, and William's pathetic lunge across the table had crossed the line from a private family dispute into a severe security liability. "Sir," the manager said, his voice hard and uncompromising, as he looked directly at William, who was still struggling to push himself up from the wine-soaked table. "I must ask you to leave the premises immediately. Your behavior is completely unacceptable, and you are disturbing our other guests." William blinked, his brain struggling to process the sudden intrusion. "Do you know who I am?" William slurred, his arrogant reflex kicking in, even as he stood dripping with wine and failure. "I am William Wilson. I am a premier member here. You cannot throw me out." The manager did not even blink. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Wilson," the manager replied, his tone dripping with absolute disdain. "And your premier membership is permanently revoked as of this exact second. You will gather your belongings and you will exit this building immediately, or I will have these officers physically drag you out, and I will personally call the police to press charges for the destruction of our property." The threat of police intervention finally pierced through William's intoxicated rage. He realized that a police report would instantly trigger an investigation into the very federal fraud he was desperately trying to outrun. His shoulders slumped. The remaining fight completely drained out of him. He looked like a deflated, pathetic shell of a man. Barbara stood up mechanically, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. She grabbed her expensive handbag, her eyes staring blankly at the floor. The shock of the eviction and the intense burning humiliation of being thrown out of a high-end restaurant had rendered her entirely catatonic. Ashley pushed herself away from the glass door. Her tears had ruined her makeup, leaving dark, jagged streaks across her cheeks. She looked at the abandoned wedding ring resting on the audit folder, then looked at me. There was no more bluster. There were no more threats of billionaire lawyers. She had gambled her entire existence on a massive sociopathic lie, and she had lost everything. The two security guards stepped into the room, their physical presence leaving no room for argument. They flanked William and Barbara, silently directing them toward the exit. "Move," the manager commanded, gesturing toward the door. I stepped back, clasping my hands behind my back, and watched them go. William, Barbara, and Ashley walked out of the private suite. They were forced to march directly through the center of the main dining room. Every single wealthy, influential patron in the restaurant stopped what they were doing to watch the procession. The Wilsons were forced to endure a grueling, agonizing walk of shame under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the exact social class they had destroyed themselves trying to impress. They were completely exposed. Their fraud, their bankruptcy, and their toxic dysfunction were laid bare for the entire city to witness. The security guards marched them out the front doors and pushed them into the freezing, biting wind of the cold DC night. They had no bridge loan. They had no wealthy in-laws. They had no home. They walked out into the darkness, financially ruined, socially ostracized, and completely destroyed. The manager turned back to me, his expression softening slightly as he took in my crisp, disciplined military uniform. "I apologize for the disturbance, Major," he said respectfully. "We will add the damages to their final outstanding account balance." "Thank you," I replied calmly, stepping forward to retrieve my tactical briefcase. "Do not worry about the damages. I will settle the bill for the table tonight. Consider it a parting gift." It took exactly 6 months for the complete and absolute reality of their financial destruction to finalize. The federal fraud investigation triggered by the unpaid commercial loans swiftly dismantled any remaining illusions William held about his social standing or his ability to talk his way out of consequences. The exclusive private club, completely furious over the bounced checks and the massive public humiliation they had endured, aggressively sued William and Barbara for the unpaid $35,000 catering bill. Without their leveraged trust fund, their stolen credit lines, or the military hazard pay they had been siphoning from my accounts, they had absolutely no way to pay the judgment. The resulting legal fees and court-ordered penalties completely decimated their already crumbling credit scores. Colin processed the annulment with lethal, unyielding efficiency. His family's high-powered legal team severed Ashley from the sterling banking fortune before she could even attempt to lay claim to a single dime. They buried her in airtight non-disclosure agreements and aggressive counterclaims that left her completely paralyzed. Stripped of their stolen assets, their luxury cars aggressively repossessed by angry lenders, and effectively blacklisted from every single high society circle in the city, the three of them were forced to face the brutal reality of the working class they had always openly despised. With their primary estate rightfully reclaimed by my corporate portfolio, William, Barbara, and Ashley were forced to relocate into a cramped, poorly insulated two-bedroom apartment in a decaying industrial suburb. William, a man who once boasted about playing golf with senators and managing imaginary wealth, took a minimum-wage job scanning inventory at a local discount hardware store. His days of bespoke suits were replaced by a stiff polyester uniform and a plastic name tag. Barbara, whose entire identity revolved around hosting elite charity galas, was forced to work the customer service desk at a chain pharmacy, dealing with the daily complaints of the exact demographic she used to mock. Ashley, stripped of her designer wardrobe, her stolen engagement ring, and her wealthy husband, found herself working the cash register at a strip mall boutique. The fairy tale was dead, permanently replaced by the crushing, inescapable grind of basic survival. I did not watch their downfall. I was entirely too busy building my own empire. With my combat tour officially concluded, I transitioned out of active duty and stepped fully into my role as the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Defense Logistics and Vanguard Real Estate. The heavy, suffocating burden of trying to earn the love of a family that only valued my financial utility was completely gone. In its place, I found a profound, unshakable peace. Operating my companies no longer felt like a contingency plan against my father's reckless, arrogant spending. It was a thriving, globally expanding enterprise built on military precision, fierce integrity, and raw, unfiltered hard work. We doubled our commercial acquisition portfolio in a single quarter, securing massive multi-million-dollar supply chain contracts across 3 different continents. I moved my corporate headquarters into a sprawling state-of-the-art facility in downtown Washington. I no longer spent my nights worrying about fraudulent loans, toxic family dynamics, or wondering why I was never good enough for my own parents. I spent them steering a highly profitable corporation toward international dominance, surrounded by people who respected my discipline and valued my leadership. Thanksgiving arrived with a crisp, clear chill in the air, but the inside of the lake house radiated warmth and genuine, vibrant life. I had completely renovated the property aggressively, stripping away the ostentatious, gaudy country club aesthetic my mother had favored. I replaced it with clean, modern architecture, utilizing natural stone and rich timber that honored the stunning natural beauty of the surrounding water. The massive stone fireplace roared to life, casting a golden, comforting glow across the spacious living room. The house was not filled with pretentious socialites, fake friends, or people desperately trying to impress each other with fabricated wealth. It was filled with my actual chosen family, my loyal military brothers and sisters, the people who had watched my back in hostile combat zones and truly understood the meaning of sacrifice, shared stories, and cracked jokes on the deep leather sofas. My brilliant corporate executive team laughed loudly in the expansive kitchen as we prepared the massive holiday feast, moving with the same coordinated efficiency we applied to our global supply routes. And sitting at the center island reviewing a new commercial real estate acquisition file with a genuine relaxed smile was Colin. He had not just survived the brutal exposure of Ashley's grift, he had thrived. The shared experience of dismantling the Wilson family fraud had forged an unexpected ironclad respect between us. We had bonded over a mutual appreciation for transparency, hard data, and ruthless accountability. He had become one of my closest, most reliable friends and a highly trusted financial partner for Vanguard's domestic expansion strategy. The energy in the room was entirely authentic and undeniably powerful. There were no hidden agendas simmering beneath the surface, no desperate grabs for unearned social status, and absolutely no lies holding the foundation together. I poured a round of vintage bourbon, the amber liquid catching the firelight as I filled the heavy crystal glasses. I tapped my glass against the granite countertop, the sharp, clear ring instantly getting everyone's attention. The room quieted down, turning their smiling, expectant faces toward me. I looked at the incredible, fiercely loyal people surrounding me, taking in the absolute perfection of the life I had built from the ashes of my past. I raised my glass high into the air, feeling the profound weight of my own hard-won victory. They stopped me at the door and told me I wasn't family. I said, my voice steady, resonant, and filled with absolute gratitude. Turns out it was the greatest gift they ever gave me. Sometimes the most profound and painful betrayals come from the exact people who were supposed to protect us. For years, I operated under the flawed belief that blood inherently dictated loyalty. I allowed my family's relentless pursuit of high society status and their toxic obsession with appearances to dictate my value. But the undeniable truth I learned the hard way is that respect cannot be bought with stolen money, and genuine love should never require you to sacrifice your own peace, sanity, or financial security. If you find yourself constantly shrinking to fit into a space where you are only valued for what can be extracted from you, it is time to walk away. Real family does not drain your accounts, fabricate malicious lies about your character, or use your darkest moments to fund their illusions of grandeur. True family is built on a solid foundation of fierce integrity, mutual respect, and authentic connection. It is the people who stand by your side when the reality is ugly, the people who share the trenches with you, and the ones who defend your honor when you are not in the room. We cannot control the family we are born into, but we possess the absolute power to choose the family we keep. Severing ties with toxic relatives is never a sign of failure. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation and strength. You have every right to foreclose on relationships that repeatedly bankrupt your spirit. Share your experiences in the comments below. If you have ever had to make the difficult decision to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own peace, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your power, demanding accountability, and finding the strength to build your own chosen family.